The night breeze passed through the fields of the village, creating a gentle rustle among the crops. As far as the eye could see, there were golden wheat fields and tall mango trees. In the moonlight, everything seemed calm and peaceful. The story of this village was far from quiet. This village, called Sundarpur, was known for its fertile land, its pure air, and its soulful soil. Here, every household knew the other. Relationships were deeply intertwined, and every person was somehow part of another's life. In such a place, friendships were deep, and enmities even deeper. In Sundarpur, two families were the most well-known: family of Chaudhry Iqbal and the family of Malik Bashir. Both were landowners. Both made their living from farming, and between them existed an old, silent rivalry. No one really knew where the hostility began, but the elders of the village often said it had started years ago with a quarrel over irrigation water. Since then, the two households had stood apart. Chaudhry Iqbal's son was Ayaan, mischievous, stubborn, and playful to the core. There was always a glint of mischief in his eyes, as though the whole world was nothing more than a game for him. On the other side was Zoya, the daughter of Malik Bashir, wise, determined, and straightened. Her deep, thoughtful eyes and graceful manner made her stand apart. From childhood, the two had been rivals. Ayaan could never stand Zoya's serious nature. To him, she always acted as if she was superior to everyone else. Zoya, on the other hand, had no patience for Ayaan's antics and recklessness. Whenever the two crossed paths, sharp words were exchanged, and bitter glances shot like arrows. The village atmosphere and childhood quarrels in Sundarpur's only school. They studied together. Ayaan was always up to something, hiding the teacher's chalk, making the class laugh so hard that no one could focus. Zoya, meanwhile, remained buried in her books, always eager to answer questions first. One day, the teacher wrote a difficult math problem on the blackboard. The entire class fell silent. "Whoever solves this," the teacher said, "will win a prize." Zoya's hand shot up instantly. She solved the problem with confidence, earning the teacher's praise and a brand new book as a reward. Ayaan's face darkened. Unable to control himself, he muttered loudly, "Sir, she's always stuck in her books. Instead of rewarding her, why don't you let us play cricket? At least then she'll learn what fun means." The whole class burst into laughter. Zoya's eyes flashed with anger. "And you," she retorted, "are always busy wasting time. That's why you'll never learn anything in life." The quarrel escalated, and soon the teacher lost his patience. Both Ayaan and Zoya were sent outside to stand as punishment. From that day onward, everyone in class understood one thing clearly: Ayaan and Zoya could never be friends. Family rivalry at home. Their enmity was fueled even more. Chaudhry Iqbal would often say, "Malik Bashir's family always thinks they're better than us. His daughter is no different from him." And in Malik Bashir's household, similar words were spoken. "Iqbal's son knows nothing but mischief. No manners, no seriousness. One day he will ruin his father's name." When such words came from the elders, the children's hearts only grew heavier with resentment. The village fair every year, Sundarpur held a grand fair complete with swings, sweets, and folk plays. That year, both Ayaan and Zoya attended with their friends. Ayaan, laughing and drinking lassi with his companions, noticed Zoya buying sweets with her classmates. Smirking, he called out, well, look who's here. Sundarpur's number one bookworm decided to attend the fair." Zoya shot him a sharp look, lifted her box of sweets, and replied, "Yes, why not? Unlike you, I know how to enjoy life without wasting it." The bystanders laughed at their banter. Wherever they went, their quarrels became the village's entertainment. A small mistake when the fair ended, villagers began heading home. Ayaan, still joking around with his friends, picked up a stone and tossed it into the air. By chance, it landed dangerously close to Zoya's foot. Furious, Zoya shouted, "Have you lost your mind? What if it had hit me?" Ayaan grinned cheekily. "Oh, don't be so serious. Your life could use a little fun." But Zoya's eyes filled with tears. Her voice trembled as she said, "Sometimes jokes can ruin lives." She turned away, walking off with her friends. For the first time, Ayaan felt a pang of guilt. Yet his stubborn pride wouldn't let him apologize. Strange thoughts that night. Lying on the rooftop under a blanket of stars, Ayaan found himself haunted by Zoya's tearful face. He couldn't understand why she occupied his thoughts so much. On the other side of the village, Zoya sat with her diary, writing, "I don't know why Ayaan keeps bothering me. Maybe he thinks I'm trying to act superior, but today, Today he hurt me. Perhaps, to him, I'm nothing but a joke. Journey of hatred. And so, their childhood and early youth passed this way, filled with quarrels, taunts, and endless arguments. The villagers often said, these two will never be able to tolerate each other. But life has a way of bringing unexpected turns, moments that change everything. And for Ayaan and Zoya, that turning point was not far away. The morning after that small incident at the river, the village woke to its usual rhythm. The roosters crowed, women carried baskets to the well, and children darted through narrow paths with laughter echoing between mud brick homes. Among them, Ayaan carried a bundle of firewood on his shoulder, his eyes half fixed on the path and half on the memory of the girl who had glared at him so fiercely the day before. Liba, her name was whispered often in the village, tied to admiration as much as envy. She was clever, strong-willed, and striking in her own way, not the kind of girl who bowed her head easily or softened her words for anyone. Ayaan had grown up hearing about her temper. Older women teased that she had inherited the spirit of her late grandmother, a woman who once faced off with tax collectors and sent them fleeing. To Ayaan, however, Liba was less a legend and more a constant irritation. They had been rivals since childhood, trading insults and glares across the classroom, accusing each other of cheating during games, and even fighting over who had the right to sit under the largest neem tree on hot afternoons. But yesterday's today had unsettled him. The way she had slipped by the riverbank, the way instinct had moved him forward before thought could catch up, the way his hand had held her wrist longer than necessary had left a mark he couldn't explain. He told himself it was nothing, just reflex. But he couldn't shake the image of her eyes, wide with both anger and something else he couldn't name. Liba, on her side, walked through the village lanes with a woven basket on her arm, collecting spices for her mother. Her pride was still wounded. She hated the idea of owing Ayaan anything, even something as simple as keeping her from falling into the river. She replayed the moment in her head over and over, the way his grip steadied her, the slight curl of amusement on his lips, as if saving her had been some kind of joke. She clenched her fists round the handle of the basket every time the memory returned. Arrogant boy, she muttered under her breath. Yet later that day, fate placed them in the same space once again. A festival was approaching in the village, one that required preparations from every household. The elders had decided that this year's decorations for the central square would be a communal effort, led by the youth. Ayaan was asked to handle the framework for the lanterns that would hang above the square, while Liba was chosen to oversee the dyeing of cloth banners. The first meeting was tense. Children chattered, young men argued about which trees were best for wood, and young women measured cloth with precision. In the middle of it all, Ayaan and Liba were forced to stand side by side, their voices crossing sharply. The frame needs to be strong enough to hold the lanterns through the night, Ayaan said, unrolling his plan on a rough sheet of paper. If you waste cloth on overly large banners, they'll block the lantern's light. Liba narrowed her eyes. And if your frames are as clumsy as your ideas, the whole thing will collapse. Don't lecture me about wasting cloth. At least, I know how to make colors stay bright. The group around them exchanged amused looks. They had seen these two bicker for years. To them, Ayaan and Liba's quarrels were almost entertainment. Someone muttered, if they don't fight, the sun might not rise. Ayaan heard it and smirked, though he kept his eyes on Liba. Just don't get in my way. Don't worry, she shot back. I'd rather trip on thorns than follow your path. Despite their words, something unusual unfolded as the work continued. The more they argued, the more they noticed small ways in which their efforts aligned. Ayaan's sturdy frames allowed Liba's bright banners to drape without sagging. Liba's careful measurements ensured that none of Ayaan's woodwork went to waste. The square began to transform before their eyes, and though their mouths were sharp, their hands unconsciously moved in rhythm. One evening, when most of the group had gone home, Ayaan stayed back to finish binding the last frame. Liba was still there too, rinsing dyed cloth by the well. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the drip of water and the creak of wood. Ayaan glanced her way, then quickly back at his work. You're not half bad with colors, he muttered, surprising himself with the words. Liba looked up, startled. Compliments were rare between them. And you're not completely useless with wood, she replied, though her voice softened despite herself. The air shifted slightly. Neither smiled, but both felt the tension change. from sharp edges to something quieter, less hostile. They packed their things without further words, but when Liebe walked home, she found herself thinking about his tone, not mocking, not arrogant, just honest. That night, the village square glowed with the promise of the festival. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, banners shimmered with fresh color, and children ran in circles beneath them. Elders nodded in approval, whispering that this year's decorations were the finest in a long time. Ayaan stood at one corner, wiping sweat from his forehead, while Liebe stood at another, adjusting the drape of a banner. Their eyes met across the crowd for a fleeting second. She looked away first, but not before something unspoken passed between them, something that neither insult nor glare could capture. The festival came alive with music, dance, and laughter. Families gathered, food was shared, and the square pulsed with joy. In the middle of it all, Ayaan and Liebe found themselves caught in the same circle dance. At first, they moved stiffly, avoiding each other's gaze, but as the rhythm grew faster and the circle tightened, they were drawn closer, until suddenly their hands brushed. Liebe jerked slightly, but Ayaan didn't let go this time. Instead, he steadied her again, as if the universe had conspired to repeat the riverbank moment, but different. This time, she didn't pull away. For a brief second, amidst the laughter and clapping around them, the world shrank to just the two of them. Liebe's eyes lifted to meet his, and though she tried to mask it with defiance, something softer flickered there. Ayaan's usual smirk was gone, replaced with something calmer, almost vulnerable. When the dance ended, they stepped back quickly, pretending nothing had happened. Yet both of them walked home that night, with hearts beating faster than they wished to admit. Something had shifted. Neither wanted to call it love, not yet. Not with their pride still intact, but both knew the old rhythm of hatred had cracked, and cracks, once formed, have a way of letting new things grow. The days after that small clash by the well carried with them an odd heaviness, as though the entire village had paused to breathe differently. Sensing something subtle had shifted between Ayaan and Zoya, even if neither of them admitted it. Ayaan found himself replaying her sharp words and the defiant spark in her eyes while he worked in the fields, the sun beating down on his back as he tied bundles of wheat. Zoya, meanwhile, carried water pitchers and ground grain beside her mother, but her mind betrayed her. Wandering to the sound of Ayaan's voice and the way he had caught her wrist when she almost slipped near the well, she wanted to despise him, to keep feeding the fire of irritation that had defined their childhood rivalry. Yet her heart betrayed her with a strange pull, like an invisible thread tugging her closer despite her resistance. In the evenings, when villagers gathered by the old banyan tree to share stories or watch traveling performers, their eyes often met across the crowd, lingering longer than either wanted to admit. Ayaan would quickly glance away, pretending to laugh at a neighbor's joke, while Zoya would lower her gaze to the embroidery in her lap, her needle trembling just slightly as if betraying her nerves. Still, their stubbornness remained intact. If one passed by the other in the street, there would be a curt nod. A silence waited with all the unspoken things simmering beneath. But destiny has its own patience, waiting for moments that force two souls to acknowledge what they try to bury. That moment came one afternoon when monsoon clouds rolled over the village. The air turned heavy with the smell of wet earth as the first drops began to fall, children running barefoot into the rain, shrieking with joy. Zoya had rushed to the small family shed to gather laundry before it became soaked, but in her hurry she slipped on the mud path. The bundle of clothes scattered, her ankle twisted painfully, and she gasped, struggling to rise as the downpour grew heavier. Before she could even cry for help, a hand reached out, firm, steady, familiar. Ayaan stood over her, rain dripping from his hair, his shirt clinging to his frame as he bent to gather the scattered cloth. Without waiting for permission, he lifted her gently, his arm supporting her waist, his other hand holding the bundle she had dropped. Their eyes met in the storm, hers, wide with both embarrassment and gratitude. His softened in a way she had never seen before. Neither spoke as he guided her beneath the shade of a tree, shielding her from the pelting rain. The silence between them was no longer sharp with animosity, but warm with something unspoken, something neither dared to name. "Careful next time," Ayaan murmured at last, his voice low, almost swallowed by the rain. Zoya opened her mouth to retort, to remind him she never needed his help, but the words died on her lips. All she managed was a quiet nod, her heart beat louder than the thunder overhead. That night, as lightning flickered across the sky and rain hammered the roofs, both lay awake in their separate homes, their minds restless. Ayaan could still feel the softness of her arm beneath his hand, the fragility she never allowed others to see. Zoya, despite herself, recalled the steadiness in his touch, the warmth of his presence in the storm. It unnerved her, yet in a strange, delicate way, it comforted her too. Slowly, the rhythm of the village life carried them forward, but something intangible had cracked open between them. The well where they had once sparred now became a place where silences lingered with meaning. The narrow paths where they brushed past each other now held sparks of tension that villagers began to notice, whispering quietly about how hatred, in time, can transform into something unexpected. Elders chuckled knowingly, children teased them, in innocence, and though Ayaan and Zoya still argued, their quarrels had softened, their edges dulled by something unnamed. It was in the ordinary moments, a shared glance, a hesitant smile, the brushing of hands while passing a basket that love, uninvited and persistent, began weaving itself quietly into their story. The rains lingered for weeks, soaking the village in silver sheets, swelling the riverbanks and painting the fields a lush green. With the season came a slower rhythm of life. Men worked less in the drenched fields, women spent more time weaving indoors, and children splashed through puddles until their mothers dragged them back inside. In this quiet stretch of monsoon days, the invisible bond between Ayaan and Zoya began to weave itself stronger, though neither dared to call it love. It was in the smallest of gestures that their hearts betrayed them. Zoya would catch herself glancing at the path whenever Ayaan was expected to pass by, pretending to be busy with her embroidery, yet secretly listening for his footsteps. Ayaan, on his part, found reasons to linger near the well where she often came to fetch water, offering help only to be met with her usual sharp words. Though he noticed the corners of her lips threatening to curve into a smile she fought to suppress, what had once been pure annoyance between them was now a dance, one step forward, one step back, like the rains teasing the earth with sudden downpours followed by stretches of silence. The villagers, with their keen eyes, noticed this shift before the two themselves fully admitted it. Old women gossiping near the temple would murmur, "Deco, the dono ab joget, BPR, say hein look." Even their quarrels have softened. Children teased them, singing rhymes whenever the two crossed paths. Ayaan would scowl at the mischief. Zoya would flush red. But beneath their irritation there was a current of warmth neither could deny. One late afternoon, when the rains had momentarily paused and the sky glowed with a golden haze, Zoya went to the riverbank with her younger brother to wash clothes. She knelt at the water's edge, her hands busy but her mind elsewhere, when a sudden cry made her heart leap. Her brother had slipped on the slick stones and was being pulled by the current. In that terrifying instant, before Zoya could even scream, Ayaan appeared. He had been nearby, carrying a bundle of fishing nets. Without hesitation, he dove into the river, his body cutting through the water with strong strokes. He caught the boy and pulled him safely to shore, coughing and drenched but steady, placing the child gently into Zoya's trembling arms. Her heart hammered as she clutched her brother close, tears of fear and gratitude welling in her eyes. "Tum, tum bachalia," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ayaan only shook his head, brushing wet hair from his face, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Koi or hotato, bimenya hikata," he replied simply, but the truth in his gaze lingered on her longer than words could. That night, Zoya couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment Ayaan had leaped into the water, without a second thought, risking himself for her little brother. She had always painted him in her mind as arrogant, stubborn, insufferable, but now, in that memory, he was brave, selfless, and something inside her heart shifted. Ayaan lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his modest home, recalling the fear on her face, the way her hands had trembled when she held her brother, and most of all, the way her eyes had softened when they looked at him. For the first time, he admitted to himself that what he felt for Zoya was no longer rivalry, no longer irritation. It was something deeper, something he had no control over. Days passed, and the distance between them shrank in ways that no one could ignore. Where once there were sharp exchanges, now there were hesitant conversations. They began to walk together when fetching water, sometimes talking of small things, the harvest, the village fairs, the stories their elders told. At times, silence hung between them, but it was no longer cold. It was a silence that breathed, that carried warmth and the unspoken. Ayaan began helping her father occasionally, offering to carry bundles of crops. Zoya, in turn, surprised herself by sending small things his way, an extra piece of roti when she passed by with food for workers, or a scarf she had mended quietly one evening and left near his tools without a word. These gestures spoke louder than any confession, and both carried them in their hearts like secret treasures. One evening, the village celebrated the annual Festival of Lights, a tradition marking the end of monsoon and the welcoming of clear skies. The entire village square glittered with oil lamps, their flickering flames dancing in the night. Children laughed, drums beat in rhythm, and stalls filled with sweets and bangles lined the paths. Zoya, dressed in a deep maroon dupatta, walked with her friends, her anklets chiming softly as she moved. Ayaan stood near the drummers, his eyes unable to resist following her through the crowd. Their gazes locked once, twice, until finally, as if pulled by fate, they found themselves standing side by the old banyan tree. Neither spoke at first, the noise of the festival surrounding them like a veil of sound. Then Zoya, gathering courage she never thought she'd have, whispered, "Aaj, go on, kitna khubsurat lag raha. The village looks so beautiful today." Ayaan turned to her, his voice steady but carrying something deeper. "Go on, hai, nahi, sab kuch, aliglag, raha hai." Not just the village, everything feels different. Their eyes met again, and in that silence, surrounded by the glow of countless lamps, both understood without saying it aloud. Their story had crossed from rivalry into something uncharted, something tender, something real. The days that followed were like threads slowly weaving a new kind of pattern between Ayaan and Zoya, though neither of them admitted it out loud, not even to themselves. They had been so used to locking horns that the subtle shift in their interactions almost felt unreal, yet undeniably like the quiet change of seasons when winter slowly melts into spring. Zoya, who had always carried herself with pride, found herself glancing at Ayaan when she thought no one would notice. She would watch him as he carried heavy baskets for his mother, or when he leaned against the old banyan tree outside the mosque after evening prayers, laughing with his friends. She noticed things she had never cared for before, the way his hair fell over his forehead when he was focused, the way his laughter carried a warmth that seemed to reach others, the way he treated elders with an unshakable respect. And though she would quickly avert her gaze whenever his eyes threatened to meet hers, she could not deny that something within her was softening. Ayaan, on his part, tried to keep himself steady and unchanged, yet he found himself remembering her expressions at the oddest times. Her smile when she played with the little children near the well, her determination when she argued with the shopkeeper over a fair price, her silence when she prayed in the mosque courtyard on Fridays. For years, he had convinced himself she was stubborn, spoiled, and unbearable. Yet little by little, he began to wonder if maybe those qualities he mocked had been the very things that kept her strong in a world where people whispered more about women than they cared to listen. Life in the village did not pause for their silent awakening. It went on as it always had, with the morning calls to prayer, the smoke rising from clay stoves, the chattering of women at the well, the braying of donkeys carrying loads from one side of the village to the other. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something extraordinary was unfolding. Ayaan and Zoya's story was beginning to change, though it still felt fragile, like a flame that could flicker out with the slightest wind. The first real crack in the wall between them came on a late summer evening, when the monsoon rains arrived earlier than expected. The sky had turned dark in an instant, the clouds roaring above, and the first drops fell heavy and fast. Ayaan was returning from the fields, his kurta soaked, when he saw Zoya trying to cover the books she had been carrying back from the madrasa. The path was slippery, the rain unforgiving, and for a moment she nearly lost her balance in the mud. Without thinking, Ayaan rushed to her side, holding her arm firmly before she could fall. Their eyes met in the chaos of the storm, rain trickling down both their faces. And for a second, neither spoke. Only the sound of the storm filled the air around them. Zoya, who would once have pulled away angrily, found herself whispering a quiet thank you, her voice almost lost in the thunder. Ayaan didn't reply. He simply took the bundle of books from her hands and sheltered them beneath his own shirt until they reached her home. It was a small act, simple and ordinary, yet it carried a weight that words could not capture. From that day forward, their quarrels, though still present, lacked the sharpness they once carried. There was a pause before every retort, a hesitation before every insult, as though both of them were beginning to realize that they no longer truly wanted to hurt each other. Their families noticed the change but did not speak of it. In the village, people always observed more than they admitted. Zoya's mother, however, did not miss the way her daughter's voice softened when she mentioned Ayaan, or the way her eyes lingered on the street a little longer when he passed by. And Ayaan's younger sister teased him mercilessly when she caught him smoothing his hair or adjusting his curtain before heading out, joking that perhaps he was secretly waiting to meet someone. Life, in its mysterious way, kept placing them together in moments neither could ignore. The village had a tradition of communal gatherings after the harvest, when families would share food, stories, and laughter under the open sky. That year, Ayaan and Zoya found themselves sitting closer than ever before, not by choice but by circumstance, surrounded by neighbors and children. When Zoya laughed at a joke shared by one of the elders, Ayaan found himself smiling without realizing it. When he spoke about his dreams of one day expanding his family's small plot of land, Zoya listened with an attentiveness that surprised him. It was as though their old battles had become the foundation for a new kind of understanding, like two rivers that had once crashed against each other, now learning to flow side by side. Yet neither was ready to name what was happening. To admit it would be to step into dangerous territory, where families, traditions, and expectations could easily crush their newfound bond. But love, real love, does not wait for permission. It grows in silence, in stolen glances, in unspoken words, in the spaces between two people who once believed they could never belong together. And so, as the days passed, Ayaan and Zoya found themselves caught between what they had always been enemies, locked in rivalry, and what they were, slowly becoming two souls, learning the language of love. The village around them remained unaware of the storm quietly brewing in their hearts, a storm far more powerful than any monsoon could ever bring. The next morning, the village awoke with the sound of birdsong echoing between the tall trees and the gentle murmur of the river. Life seemed ordinary for everyone else, but for Ayaan and Zoya, something had shifted, though they didn't openly acknowledge it. For Zoya, the memory of Ayaan rushing to help her father the previous day lingered heavily on her mind. She replayed the moment again and again, the urgency in his footsteps, the way he had pushed aside all grievances just to help. It wasn't what she had expected from someone she thought despised her. For Ayaan, though he wouldn't admit it to himself, the image of Zoya's worried face when she had run to her father had unsettled him. He had seen fear in her eyes, but also strength, and something about it softened the walls he had so carefully built. That day, Ayaan walked to the fields early, a bundle of tools over his shoulder. His father had asked him to help mend a broken fence near the crops. He worked in silence, the kind of silence where thoughts ran louder than words. Every time he hammered the wood, he thought of how foolish he had been, how he had spent years avoiding Zoya, arguing with her over meaningless things, as if rivalry was more important than peace. He wondered if she still thought ill of him, or if yesterday's moment had left a mark. Zoya, meanwhile, was at the well with her mother, filling clay pots with fresh water. The women of the village exchanged greetings, speaking of the upcoming harvest festival, but Zoya found herself distracted. She would catch herself staring toward the fields where Ayaan usually worked. Her mother noticed her absent mind and teased lightly, "Zoya, you're spilling more water than you're bringing home today. What has taken over your thoughts?" Zoya quickly smiled and dismissed it, but her heart raced at the thought of explaining. She couldn't yet understand her own feelings, let alone speak them aloud. As fate would have it, their paths crossed again that afternoon. Zoya was walking toward the river to wash clothes, balancing a basket on her hip, when she spotted Ayaan repairing a cartwheel on the path. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to continue walking as if she hadn't noticed him. But her heart, betrayed, hurt, beat faster with every step. Ayaan looked up just as she passed, his hands covered in grease from the wooden axle. Their eyes met briefly, and this time, neither turned away as quickly as before. For a second, silence stretched between them, and it felt heavier than all the arguments they had ever had. "Did your father rest well after yesterday?" Ayaan finally asked, his tone casual, but his eyes earnest. Zoya stopped, surprised. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone ask something so considerate. "Yes," she said softly. "He's feeling much better today. Thank you for helping." The words felt strange on her tongue, but they were genuine. Ayaan wiped his hands on a cloth, trying to hide the faint warmth creeping up his neck. Anyone would have done the same, he muttered, though deep down he knew not everyone would have rushed the way he had. Zoya gave a small smile, one that caught Ayaan off guard. It wasn't mocking or sharp like before, it was gentle, almost shy. She walked away then, leaving him staring after her, wondering why that single smile felt heavier on his heart than any insult she had ever thrown. Over the following weeks, small changes began to unfold between them. When they crossed paths in the market, they no longer exchanged cold glares, but small nods of acknowledgement. During village gatherings, if they happened to sit near each other, their conversations were short but civil. It was as if an invisible wall was slowly crumbling, brick by brick, though neither of them dared to admit it. The harvest festival arrived soon after a time of joy, music, and togetherness. The entire village was adorned with colorful fabrics. Lanterns hung from trees, and the aroma of roasted corn and sweet jaggery filled the air. Children ran about with sparklers, while the elders shared stories of old times. Zoya wore a crimson dress stitched by her mother, her long hair braided with small flowers. Ayaan, dressed in a simple white kurta, helped his father arrange chairs for the elders near the bonfire. When the dancing began, young men and women were encouraged to join in circles, clapping to the rhythm of the doll. Zoya stood at the edge, reluctant, until her friends pulled her in. She laughed, the sound of it carrying across the night, catching Ayaan's attention. He found himself watching her, noticing how her eyes sparkled in the glow of the lanterns, how her laughter seemed to soften the evening. He quickly looked away, embarrassed by his own thoughts. But fate, once again mischievous, decided to push them closer. As the dance grew wilder, the circle shifted, and suddenly, Ayaan and Zoya stood across from each other, hands almost brushing. As the group spun, the brief contact sent a strange electricity through both of them. For a moment, the world around them blurred, the drums, the laughter, the firelight all faded, leaving only their eyes locked. It was Zoya who broke the moment, quickly looking away with a racing heart. Ayaan, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened. The boy who once thought of her as nothing more than a rival was now questioning everything he had ever believed. Later that night, when the festival was winding down, Zoya walked to the well to fetch water. The lanterns still glowed faintly, and the moonlight bathed the village in silver. As she bent to lower her pot, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Ayaan approaching slowly, his hands in his pockets. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence filled only by the chirping of crickets. "I wanted to say," Ayaan began, hesitating, "that you looked happy tonight." Zoya blinked, surprised by his words. She tilted her head, studying him. "Happy? Yes," he said, his voice quieter now. "It suits you." Her cheeks warmed under the moonlight, though she tried to hide it. "And you looked different too. Not like the Ayaan who always argued with me." He gave a small laugh, scratching the back of his neck. "Maybe I'm tired of arguing." Their eyes lingered on each other, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, yet undeniable. It wasn't love yet, but it was the beginning of a shift they could no longer ignore. That night, when Zoya returned home, she lay awake long after her family had fallen asleep. She thought about Ayaan's words, about the way he had looked at her, not with disdain, but with something gentler. Across the village, Ayaan sat outside his house under the stars, replaying the sound of her laughter at the festival, wondering why it echoed louder in his mind than the drums. Neither of them admitted it aloud, but something had begun, and though they didn't yet know it, the story of Ayaan and Zoya, the boy and girl who once despised each other, was only just beginning to bloom into something much greater. The days that followed were filled with an odd quietness, one that both Arav and Mira felt, but neither dared to admit. The argument in the marketplace and the events afterward had left a strange taste in the air. The villagers noticed too how the two who once couldn't stand the sight of each other now exchanged fewer insults, fewer glares. Instead, when their eyes met, there was hesitation. Not warmth, not yet, but not the sharp hostility either. Something was shifting, it began, subtly, almost like the soft whisper of the monsoon breeze that slips through the fields before the rains announce themselves. Arav, while working in his father's wheat fields, often found himself distracted, glancing toward the lane that led past Mira's house. He told himself it was just habit after all. She always passed by with her basket of vegetables, or the goats she took for grazing. But the truth was, he looked for her. Mira too, though she would never confess it, had started noticing the small things. Once, as she carried water from the village well, she caught sight of Arav repairing the fence near the banyan tree. His sleeves were rolled up, sweat glistening on his arms, his focus sharp as he tied the wooden stakes together. She quickly turned away, embarrassed at herself for staring, but the image lingered longer than she expected. She tried to distract her mind by scolding herself. Why would I care what he's doing? He's still the same arrogant boy who mocked me since childhood. And yet, the memory stayed. The turning point came during the village festival of lights, a yearly celebration when families decorated their homes with earthen lamps, and the whole village shimmered under the golden glow. Children ran through the lanes with sparklers, elders recited old tales, and young people sang songs near the temple courtyard. It was a night that carried joy, laughter, and something magical in the air. That evening, Arav had been helping to set up lanterns near the temple. He climbed a wooden ladder, fixing them onto long ropes that stretched across the courtyard. Mira, along with her friends, arrived carrying baskets of flowers to decorate the temple steps. Their eyes met briefly in the crowd, and for a moment, both forgot themselves. The glow of 1,000 lamps reflected in their eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. But before they could linger in it, Mira's friends pulled her away, and Arav forced himself to return to his work. Later that night, when the festival was at its peak, disaster nearly struck. One of the lantern ropes loosened, and a burning lamp dropped dangerously close to a group of children playing below. Gasps filled the air. Without hesitation, Arav jumped from the platform, shielding the children, while Mira rushed forward with her dupatta to smother the small flames before they spread. In that instant, they worked as one. No arguments, no rivalry, only instinct and courage. The villagers cheered when the danger passed, praising their quick thinking. Someone even remarked, "Look at Arav and Mira, once enemies, today's saviors." Together, the words made both of them flush, and they avoided each other's gaze amidst the commotion. But deep inside, something cracked open. After the festival, Mira found herself restless. As she lay on her cot under the stars, she replayed the scene again and again, the way Arav's eyes had widened when he saw the lantern fall, the way he moved to protect the children without hesitation, and how, together, they had saved the moment. She had never thought of him as selfless before. Arrogant, yes. Careless, yes. But brave and protective. That was new. Arav too, sitting by the fields with his flute that night, felt the stirrings of a question he could not shake. Why do I keep noticing her? Why did it feel different when she ran to help, when our hands brushed while putting out the fire? He had mocked her for years, yet tonight he saw a strength in her that silenced his usual teasing. She was not the stubborn girl he used to fight with. She was something else, something he couldn't quite name. The days after the festival carried this unspoken change. The villagers whispered about it, some teasing them openly. Arav's cousin laughed. "Careful, Bai. If you look at Mira too much, the whole village will know what's in your heart before you do." Arav snapped back, pretending to be annoyed, but his cheeks betrayed him with their warmth. Mira too faced her share of teasing from her friends. One afternoon, as they washed clothes by the river, her friend Annika nudged her and said, "So, when will you admit it? You and Arav are no longer enemies." Mira splashed water in her direction, laughing it off, but she couldn't hide the shy curve of her lips. Yet, as much as they both felt the shift, neither dared to cross the invisible line between them. Pride held them back, fear of rejection held them back, and perhaps a fear of what the village might say if their rivalry turned into something else. The chance came unexpectedly one evening, when Mira was returning from the fields late. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, and the sky was painted with streaks of orange and violet. On the narrow path near the old banyan tree, she stumbled when her sandal caught in a root. She almost fell, but a strong hand caught her. Just in time, Arav. Their eyes met in the dimming light, close enough to hear each other's breaths. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mira pulled her hand away quickly, muttering, "I could have managed." Arav smirked softly, but not with his usual teasing tone. Instead, he said quietly, "You don't always have to manage everything alone." Those words stayed with her long after he walked away. For the first time, his voice had carried no mockery, only sincerity. And that sincerity began to break down the walls she had built against him all these years. From that day onward, things changed in ways so small that only they noticed. When Mira passed by Arav's field, he offered her water without being asked. When Arav's bullock cart broke down near the well, Mira helped carry his goods without complaint. They still argued, still teased, but the edge of hatred was gone. In its place, something warmer, more fragile, was beginning to grow. And so, the village that once knew them as enemies began to see the first hints of a story that was only just beginning. A story of love, hidden beneath years of rivalry, now slowly coming to light, like a lamp that flickers before it glows brighter. Rainier didn't expect to see Ayaan again so soon, but life in a small village always had its way of weaving people together, whether they wanted it or not. The very next morning, as she carried a basket of vegetables to the market, she noticed him helping an elderly shopkeeper lift heavy sacks of grain. His sleeves were rolled up, his brow slightly damp with sweat, and his expression focused. For the first time, Rainier noticed something beyond her irritation, a kind of sincerity in the way he worked, as if he wasn't doing it for praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She quickly shook the thought away, reminding herself of all the arguments they'd had, but her eyes lingered for a second longer than they should have. Ayaan caught her looking. Instead of a smirk, instead of the usual sarcasm, he gave her a small, almost reluctant nod. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was something in between. Rainier's heart skipped unexpectedly, though she covered it with a quick frown and walked past. Still, the image of him lifting those sacks stayed with her longer than she wanted. That evening, a sudden summer storm rolled over the village. The wind picked up, the clouds darkened, and the rain poured down with a wild force. Rainier was at the stream, trying to fill her pots before heading home, when the path became slippery. She tried to hurry, but one wrong step sent her tumbling down the embankment, her foot twisting painfully as she landed in the muddy water. Her cries were drowned out by the rain. She tried to stand, but the pain shot through her ankle, making her collapse again. And then, through the downpour, she saw a shadow running toward her. It was Ayaan. He knelt beside her, his hair dripping, his hands steady as he reached for her. "Rainier, don't move," he said firmly, his voice louder than the storm. "You've twisted your ankle." She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his help, but she couldn't move, and the concern in his eyes wasn't fake. It was raw, urgent. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her through the rain-soaked path. She protested at first, embarrassed, but the truth was, she felt strangely safe in his arms, shielded from the storm by his determination. When they reached her house, her mother rushed to the door, alarmed at seeing her daughter injured and Ayaan carrying her. Together, they settled Rainier inside. Ayaan found bandages, helped wrap her ankle carefully, and then stood to leave. But Rainier, still catching her breath, whispered softly, "Thank you." It was the first time she had said those words to him without bitterness, and Ayaan, pausing at the door, looked at her with something unspoken in his eyes. He only nodded and stepped back into the rain. That night, as the storm raged outside, Rainier lay awake thinking. For the first time, her feelings toward Ayaan were no longer simple hate. Something had shifted, like the storm had washed away a layer of old hostility, leaving behind confusion, and a spark of something else she couldn't yet name. The storm passed, but its memory lingered, not just in the muddy fields and fallen branches scattered across the village, but in Rainier's heart. She replayed the moment again and again. The way Ayaan had rushed to her side, the steadiness in his arms as he carried her, the quiet strength in his voice. Every time she thought about it, her chest tightened in a way that unsettled her. She had always thought of him as her enemy, her constant irritation. But now, that certainty was crumbling. The next few days, Rainier stayed home, her injured ankle forcing her to rest. She hated being idle, but she noticed something unexpected. John came by more than once, pretending he was just delivering things from the market. He'd drop off fresh fruit, or ask if her mother needed anything from the fields. He never stayed long, but his presence lingered in the house like an echo dot. At first, Rainier told herself it was just politeness. Maybe he felt guilty for all the times they fought. But when he brought her a book one afternoon, an old worn collection of village folk tales, her heart betrayed her. "I thought you'd like it," he said, avoiding her eyes. "It belonged to my father. He used to read it to me." Rainier took the book slowly, her fingers brushing against his. The touch was fleeting, but it sent warmth rushing through her. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy, alive with something neither dared to name. That evening, Rainier opened the book and found a folded piece of paper inside. It was a sketch rough, but beautiful, of the river that ran through their village. She realized Ayaan must have drawn it himself. Somehow, that simple drawing spoke louder than words. The following day, she surprised herself by waiting for him. When he passed by with a bundle of hay on his shoulders, she called out from the veranda, "Ayaan." He stopped, startled, then walked over. "How's the ankle?" "Better," she admitted. Then, after a pause, she added, "I liked your drawing." For the first time, he smiled, really smiled, not the mocking smirk she was used to. It was warm, unguarded, and it made her heart stumble. From that day on, something subtle began to shift between them. The sharp words they once threw at each other softened into playful teasing. The silences grew less heavy, more comfortable. Their paths, once parallel but divided, began to bend closer together. But neither of them said the word that hovered unsaid between them: love. It was too soon, too fragile, too terrifying. And yet, both of them felt it growing quietly, like a seed pushing through the soil after rain. By the time Rania's ankle healed, life in the village had returned to its usual rhythm. The fields were green again, and preparations for the annual spring festival had begun. It was the time of year when the whole village gathered, singing, dancing, lighting lanterns by the river, and sharing food late into the night. For Rainier, the festival had always been magical, but this year it felt different. She found herself thinking of how it would feel to attend with Ayaan by her side. The thought startled her. She had never imagined such a thing before. Yet, when she caught sight of him helping the carpenters set up the lantern poles in the village square, her stomach twisted in a way she couldn't explain. Ayaan, too, was restless. He had spent years keeping his distance from Rainier, shielding himself behind teasing and mock fights. But the storm had cracked that wall, and now he couldn't ignore what he felt. Every time she smiled, every time she looked at him with those wide, questioning eyes, something inside him stirred. Still, he didn't dare say it out loud. The fear of rejection, or worse, of ridicule, was too great. The festival night arrived. The air buzzed with music from the dole and flute. Children darted between the lanterns, and the aroma of roasted corn and sweet jaggery filled the streets. Rainier wore a pale green dress her mother had stitched for her, the color of new leaves. After rain, she looked radiant, though she herself didn't realize it. When Ayaan saw her, his breath caught. He wanted to go to her, but before he could, another boy from the neighboring village approached her. His name was Samir, charming, bold, and always quick with compliments. Samir bowed playfully, offering Rainier a garland of flowers. "For the most beautiful girl in the festival," he declared. The crowd around them chuckled and clapped, but Ayaan froze. Something ugly and unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Jealousy. He watched as Rainier hesitated, clearly flustered. She smiled politely, taking the flowers out of courtesy, but Ayaan couldn't see the hesitation. All he saw was Samir standing too close, grinning at her. Without thinking, Ayaan turned away, his jaw clenched. The music, the laughter, the lantern of it blurred. For the first time, he didn't want to be at the festival. Rainier noticed his sudden disappearance. She excused herself from Samir and hurried after him, weaving through the crowd until she found him standing by the riverbank, away from the lights. His back was to her, his hands clenched into fists. "Ayaan," she called softly. He didn't turn. "Go back, Rainier. Your admirer is waiting." Her brows furrowed. "Admirer? You mean Samir?" He was just being polite. Ayaan laughed bitterly. "Polite? He practically declared you his." The hurt in his voice made Rainier's heart ache. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Do you really think I care about Samir?" At that he turned, and their eyes met. His jealousy, her confusion, their unspoken feelings, all of it hung in the air between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The river shimmered with lantern light, and the sounds of the festival felt far away. Something was about to change. The silence between them was sharp, broken only by the faint splash of water against the riverbank. Ayaan's jaw was tight, his breath uneven, as if he was battling words he wasn't ready to speak. Rainier, however, had never been one to back down. From him, not when they argued as children, not when they clashed as teenagers, and certainly not now. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, her eyes fixed on him. "You're angry," she said quietly, "but not at Samir. You're angry at me." Ayaan blinked, taken aback. "At you, no." His voice faltered. I'm angry at myself. That startled her. She frowned. Yourself? Why? He let out a shaky laugh. Because I've spent years pretending I don't care. Pretending you don't matter to me. And then, tonight, one garland of flowers from some fool, and suddenly I realize how much you do matter. Too much. Her heart thudded. The words, raw and unpolished, landed between them like stones dropped in still water. She hadn't expected this. Ayaan had always been a stormloud, stubborn, difficult but vulnerable. That was new. Ayaan, she whispered. He looked away quickly, as though ashamed. Forget I said that. It doesn't matter. But she stepped forward, placing herself in his line of sight again. Her hand brushed against his arm, hesitantly at first, then with quiet certainty. It does matter, she said firmly. It matters because I feel it too. His head snapped toward her, his dark eyes searching her face. You, what? I feel it too, she repeated, her voice trembling but steady enough. All those years we spent fighting, I thought I hated you. But maybe it wasn't hate. Maybe it was something else. Something I didn't understand. The air thickened between them. The lantern light from the river painted their faces in soft gold, their closeness pulling them together like invisible strings. Ayaan raised a hand as though to touch her cheek, but stopped midway, uncertain. Rainier leaned into his hand before he could pull away. The contact was electric, simple yet earth-shattering. I don't know what this means for us, she whispered, but I know one thing. It's not nothing. Ayaan's throat worked as he swallowed hard. His usual confidence, his sharp tongue, all of it seemed to dissolve. He nodded once, slowly. It's not nothing, he agreed. They stood like that, for a long time, neither moving, neither needing to. The festival music drifted faintly in the background, but here by the river, the world felt suspended, fragile and infinite. When they finally walked back to the square, side by side, something had shifted. They weren't enemies anymore. They weren't even just childhood rivals. There was something new, something unspoken yet undeniable. But neither of them knew that with this change would also come challenges, ones that would test their bond in ways they could never imagine. Next morning, the entire village seemed to hum with the aftermath of the festival. Women gathered near the well, exchanging stories about who danced with whom. Children ran around playing pretend, mimicking the drummers and singers from the night before. But what caught everyone's attention was not the fireworks or the feast, was the way Ayaan and Rainier had walked back into the square together, side by side, too close to different dot. By the time the sun rose, whispers had already started. Did you see the two of them? One woman muttered to her friend as she drew water. All these years they fought like cats and dogs, and now, look at them, like a bride and groom returning from their own wedding. Another laughed softly. Maybe it was bound to happen. You know what they say, hate and love are two sides of the same coin. Rainier overheard bits of the chatter when she came to fetch water. She kept her head down, cheeks burning, but the flutter in her chest betrayed her. She couldn't deny it. What she felt last night was real, but real was dangerous. As she carried her pot back home, she found her mother waiting at the door, arms folded. Rainier, her mother said, voice calm but probing. Is there something you need to tell me about Ayaan? The question froze her. She stammered, no, Oma, nothing. Her mother studied her face, not fooled. Be careful, Betty. Affection can be sweet, but it can also bring storms. Remember, families don't forget years of rivalry, so icily. Meanwhile, Ayaan faced his own storm. His father, stern and sharp, cornered him in the courtyard. You were with Rainier last night. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Ayaan didn't flinch. Yes, his father's brows drew together. After everything, after years of fighting their family, do you know how people will talk? Ayaan's jaw clenched. Let them talk. Stubborn boy, his father spat, pacing. Do you realize what this means? If you shame this family, if you dishonor us, I won't dishonor anyone. Ayaan interrupted, his voice low but firm. But I won't lie about what I feel either. The air between father and son crackled with tension. For the first time in years, Ayaan wasn't speaking out of pride or rebellion. He was speaking from something deeper, something unshakable. That night, as the village settled into quiet, Ayaan and Rainier found themselves once more by the riverbank, drawn to the same place where everything had changed. Neither spoke at first. The silence was heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Finally, Rainier broke it. They're all talking about us. Ayaan smirked faintly. Let them, people will always talk. But what if they turn it into something ugly? She asked, worry shadowing her eyes. What if they try to keep us apart? Ayaan stepped closer, his expression steady. Then we'll fight them together. For once in our lives, Rainy, we'll fight on the same side. Her breath caught. The idea, once impossible, now felt like the only truth that mattered. For the first time, she let herself imagine it, not just fleeting moments by the river, not just stolen glances at festivals, but a life together. And though the road ahead promised storms, in that fragile moment beneath the starlit sky, both Ayaan and Rania knew this was only the beginning. The days following the festival were anything but ordinary. Ayaan and Rania's quiet meetings by the river, their shared glances at the market, and the subtle smiles that passed between them did not go unnoticed. What was once rivalry had shifted into something softer, something dangerously close to love. But love rarely grows in silence, especially in a village where every whisper becomes tomorrow's rumor. By the third morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Old men sitting in the tea shop chuckled knowingly. Young women exchanged shy giggles, and even the children teased each other, pretending to be Ayaan and Rania. For some, it was sweeter stories straight out of an old folktale, enemies becoming lovers. But for others, especially those who remembered the long history of resentment between their families, it was unsettling. One evening, Rania's father, Hakim Sahib, called her into the veranda. His face was grave, his voice firm. Rania, I've been hearing things, he began, his eyes narrowing. Things about you and that boy Ayaan. Her heart raced. She forced her voice to remain calm. People talk, Abba. You know how the village is. Don't play games with me, he snapped, though not unkindly. Is it true? Have you been meeting him? Rania hesitated, then nodded faintly. Yes. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Hakim Sahib sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. Rania, his family is not like ours. You know the quarrels, the bitterness, the accusations. Do you think it is so easy to forget all that? Her eyes softened. But Abba, what if we're the ones meant to end all that bitterness? What if this is our chance? Her father stared at her as though she had spoken a foreign language. He shook his head slowly. You are young, Rania. You don't understand. Families hold grudges longer than they hold memories. Do not fool yourself into thinking you can change that overnight. Meanwhile, Ayaan faced a battle of his own. His father, Rofkon, was furious. You dare bring shame upon this house, he thundered, slamming his hand against the table. After all their family has done to us, after the humiliation, the fights, the insults, how can you even look at that girl, let alone? Ayaan cut him off, his voice strong. Because I love her. The words hung in the air like a spark in dry grass. Rofkon stared at his son as though he had lost his mind. Love, he repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. What does a boy like you know of love? Love does not put food on the table. Love does not protect our honor. Ayaan's fists clenched, but his voice stayed calm. Maybe not, but hate hasn't given us anything either. What has all this fighting brought us? Nothing but bitterness. If love can end that, isn't it worth trying? His father's face hardened, his pride refusing to yield. But deep inside, Ayaan's words left a sting. The tension between the families grew heavier with each passing day. Some villagers quietly supported the idea of their union, calling it destiny. Others saw it as betrayal, an insult to generations of grudges. And so, what began as a tender spark between two hearts now threatened to ignite an entire village. But in the middle of the storm, Ayaan and Rania clung to one truth. Their feelings were real, and neither was ready to let go. The whispers soon grew louder, no longer confined to the tea shop corners or hushed gatherings. They echoed openly in the marketplace, in the fields, even during Friday prayers. By now, Ayaan and Rania's story had become the village's favorite subject. Some treated it like entertainment, others like scandal. Have you heard? A shopkeeper muttered to a customer. That girl Rania meets Ayaan near the river. The very boy her father swore never to forgive. Allah Riyam care, the customer replied, shaking his head. This will not end well. Rania, walking through the market with a basket in hand, felt the weight of every stare. Women who once greeted her with warmth now whispered behind their palms. Children sang teasing rhymes as she passed, and though she kept her head high, her heart quivered inside. That evening, she confided in Ayaan by the riverbank, where there, Secret meetings had begun. The water shimmered with the reflection of the moon, but her face was clouded with worry. "Ayaan," she said softly, "I can handle their whispers, but Abba, he looks at me differently now, like I've betrayed him." Ayaan's jaw tightened. "And my father, he speaks of honor as though it is a sword, sharp enough to cut even his own son. But Rainier, listen to me. No matter what they say, no matter how they look at us, I won't leave you." Her eyes glistened. "What if they force us apart? Then we'll fight." Ayaan replied firmly, his hand covering hers, not with anger, but with truth. "If they see our hearts are pure, one day they'll understand." But understanding did not come so icily. Only a week later, during a village wedding, the simmering tension boiled over. Both families were present, seated on opposite sides of the courtyard, their glances sharp as daggers. It might have passed quietly, had fate not intervened. When the door beat grew louder and the guests began to dance, a mischievous cousin too, bold for his own good, shouted across the courtyard, "Why don't we call Rainier and Ayaan together? After all, they're already the talk of the village." The courtyard erupted in laughter and gasps. Heads turned, eyes darted. Hakim Sahib's face turned red with fury, while Rofkon slammed his hand against the ground in anger. "This insult ends tonight," Rofkon bellowed, rising to his feet. The music stopped. The dancers froze. Silence spread like a heavy curtain. Ayaan, without hesitation, stood tall and stepped into the center of the courtyard. His voice rang clear. "There is no insult here," he declared. "If it is true that I love Rainier, then I am not ashamed. And if she feels the same, then let the world know we are not afraid." Gasps filled the air. Rainier's heart pounded, but something stronger than fear surged within her. She rose slowly, her veil slipping slightly as she moved forward. "I do," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I love him." The crowd erupted, some with shock, others with applause, others still with outrage. And just like that, a private love had become a public declaration, witnessed by the entire village. From that moment, there would be no turning back. The courtyard fell into chaos after Rainier's brave confession. Some women gasped and pulled their deporters tighter, murmuring that shame had fallen upon the families. Some young men clapped and cheered, whispering that love, this bold, was rare in their village. Children stared wide-eyed, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the moment. Hakim Sahib's face turned pale, his hand trembling as he gripped his walking stick. "Rainier," he thundered, his voice echoing across the walls. "You dare defy me in front of the entire village? Have I raised you for this humiliation?" Rainier's eyes filled with tears, but she did not lower her gaze. "Abba, this is not humiliation. This is truth. I cannot deny what my heart feels." Rofkon pushed forward, his broad shoulders towering, his voice thick with rage. "And you, Ayaan, you stand here, shaming your bloodline, dishonoring your father, and think this is courage." But Ayaan's voice did not waver. "Baba, this is not dishonor. What greater honor is there than loving with honesty, with respect, with purity? If you cannot see that now, one day you will." The crowd buzzed louder, torn between centuries of tradition and the fresh winds of defiance carried in the voices of these two young hearts. Then, as if fate itself chose to intervene, a sudden cry rang from the far corner of the courtyard. One of the wedding torches had tipped over in the commotion, and the draped cloth above caught fire. Within seconds, flames licked the side of the house, and smoke filled the air. Panic erupted. Women screamed, children scattered, men rushed for water. In that moment of chaos, it was Ayaan who leaped forward. Without hesitation, he grabbed a bucket, then another, forming a quick chain with the younger boys. "Faster!" he shouted, his hands blistering as he tossed water onto the flames. The fire roared higher, threatening to swallow the roof. And then, to everyone's shock, Rainier, her dupatta tied tightly around her head, rushed to help. She carried buckets alongside the men, her bangles clinking, her face smeared with soot, but her resolve unbroken. Seeing his daughter in danger, Hakim Sahib's heart clenched. He tried to move, but his old legs faltered. Instead, he could only watch as Ayaan shielded Rainier when sparks flew dangerously close. Together, side by side, they fought the fire, their love transforming into a force that saved not only themselves, but the entire gathering. At last, with one final splash, the flames hissed and died, leaving behind blackened walls but spared lives. The courtyard fell silent again, this time not with outrage, but with awe. Villagers looked at the young couple, faces streaked with sweat and ash, but eyes shining with unshaken devotion, and an old woman broke the silence. "If this is shame, then may we all be shamed so bravely." Others nodded. Murmurs shifted from condemnation to admiration. Hakim Sahib lowered his stick, his chest heaving. For the first time, doubt crept into his anger. Could it be that love was not weakness, but strength? Rofcon's jaw tightened, but even he could not deny the truth of what they had witnessed. Ayaan held Rania's hand, gently but firmly. "You see," he said softly, his voice carrying through the hushed courtyard, "together we are stronger than apart. This love does not destroy, it protects, it saves." No one spoke against them again that night. The fire had not only burned the roof, it had burned away the first layer of resistance in their families' hearts. But the battle was not yet over. This was only the beginning. The morning after the fire, the village stirred with restless whispers. News of the incident had spread beyond the narrow lanes. Even farmers working in distant fields spoke of how Ayaan and Rania had stood side by side, braving flames like warriors of old ballads. For the first time in years, their names were not spoken with scorn or rivalry, but with respect, though that respect was tangled with curiosity and unease. Hakim Sahib sat in the veranda of his haveli, his eyes hollow with sleeplessness. The memory of Rania rushing through fire haunted him. Again and again, he saw her coughing in the smoke, lifting buckets with trembling arms, her dupatta blackened by ash. It had torn his heart, but it had also shown him a side of her he had long ignored, his strength that was neither silent nor submissive, but fierce and determined. Rofcon, too, sat heavy with thought in his courtyard. The villagers who had once praised his pride now looked at him differently. Some muttered that perhaps Ayaan's courage was proof he had been raised well, despite Rof's strictness. Others hinted that refusing such a love after the fire would only paint him as cruel and stubborn. These whispers dug into his pride like thorns, though he told himself he cared little for gossip. Meanwhile, Ayaan walked through the village square, his head held high, yet his heart heavy. He knew yesterday's bravery had earned him admiration, but admiration was not acceptance. He saw men nod politely, but behind their eyes, hesitation lingered. And in every glance, he could feel the invisible question: would his love for Rania ever be given the blessing it needed? Rania, in her own chamber, braided her long hair with trembling hands. Her body ached from the night's struggle, but her spirit felt strangely lighter. She replayed Ayaan's words again and again in her mind. Together we are stronger than apart. Never before had she felt so certain, so unafraid of what the future held. But certainty did not erase reality. That evening, Hakim Sahib called a meeting in his courtyard. The elders of the village gathered, their white beards nodding gravely, their eyes sharp with judgment. Rof Khan arrived too, his tall frame casting a long shadow as he entered. Ayaan followed at a distance, every step heavy with the weight of what was to come. The air smelled of smoke still lingering from the fire, a reminder of what had been narrowly escaped. Hakim Sahib spoke first, his voice stern though quieter than before. "Last night, we were all tested. In that test, my daughter and Rof Khan's son showed courage. But courage is not license for disobedience. Love does not erase the rules we live by." The elders murmured in agreement. Tradition, after all, was the backbone of their world. But Rofcon stood, his hands clenched. "Hakim Sahib speaks truth. My son dishonored me before all, and though he saved us from fire, he has lit another flame that will not be so easily extinguished, the flame of rebellion." A hush fell. The word rebellion struck deep. To love was one thing, but to defy fathers, that was another. Ayaan could not remain silent. He stepped forward, his voice steady though his pulse thundered. "This is not rebellion, Baba. This is faith. Faith in love. Faith in a bond that even fire could not break. If you call this rebellion, then I will wear that title with pride, for it is better to rebel with truth than to obey in falsehood." The elders shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned, but others stroked their beards thoughtfully. A young boy who had seen Ayaan fight the fire whispered to his grandfather, and the old man only sighed. Hakim Sahib raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. His gaze softened as it fell on Rania, who stood quietly at the edge, her eyes locked on Ayaan's. For the first time, he saw not a child to be controlled, but a woman ready to shape her own destiny. Still, Pride weighed heavier than love in that moment. "This matter is not decided today," Hakim Sahib declared. "The fire showed us courage, but courage is not enough. Let us see if time proves this love to be steadfast, or if it withers like smoke." With that, the gathering dissolved. No decision had been made, but something had shifted. A wall had cracked, even if it had not yet fallen. That night, as stars lit the village sky, Ayaan stood by the riverbank, waiting. Rainier came quietly, her footsteps soft on the dirt path. "I feared they would forbid me from even stepping outside," she whispered, "and I feared they would try to separate us forever." Ayaan replied. They stood in silence, listening to the water rushing by, both knowing that their love was no longer just between them. It had become a story carried by every tongue in the village, a test watched by every eye. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing burned brighter than ever. They were not afraid to walk it together. The days after the fire carried an unusual silence through the village. The charred remains of the grain store still stood as a dark reminder, its blackened beams reaching like broken fingers toward the sky. People spoke of little else: how the fire had started, how narrowly disaster was averted, and most of all, how Ayaan and Rainier had faced it together. But with every whisper of admiration came another of suspicion. Was this fate trying to bring them together? Or was it a sign of divine displeasure at their defiance? In a village bound by centuries of tradition, the line between miracle and omen was thin. Rainier felt the shift most sharply when she walked to the well. Women who once gossiped loudly now fell quiet, their eyes darting between her and the ground. Some smiled shyly, as if in admiration. Others pressed their lips thin, as though her very presence tested their patience. Ayaan, too, bore the weight of curious stares. Men who had once challenged his defiance now seemed unsure, caught between condemning him and respecting his bravery. But for every nod of approval, there was a muttered warning: pride comes before a fall. At home, however, the storm brewed fiercest. Hakim Sahib's silence was heavier than anger. He ate little, spoke less, and carried himself with the wary dignity of a man fighting a battle he was not ready to admit he was losing. One evening, Rainier entered his study with trembling hands. She placed a tray of tea before him, then lingered, her dupatta pulled nervously across her chest. "Abba," she whispered. He did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the papers before him, though his mind was far away. "I did not mean to shame you," Rainier continued softly. "But what I feel, it is not a game, not a passing desire. It is." Hakim Sahib's hand slammed against the table, cutting her off. His voice cracked like thunder. "Enough, Rainier. You speak as though love is greater than family, greater than honor. Do you think a few moments of courage erase centuries of our name?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not back down. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, her voice steadier than she thought possible. "Honor built on cruelty is not honor at all. And if our name cannot bear love, then perhaps it is weaker than you believe." For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other, the room charged with the weight of unspoken truths. Hakim Sahib's lips trembled, but no words came. With a furious wave of his hand, he dismissed her, his eyes glistening though he turned his face away. Across the village, Ayaan faced his own storm. Rauf Khan, his father, grew harsher each day, his pride bleeding into anger. "You walk as if the village belongs to you," Rauf growled one night, pacing the courtyard. "But remember, boy, you are nothing without the name I gave you. Do you think saving grain makes you worthy of my enemy's daughter?" Ayaan met his father's glare, his voice calm yet unyielding. "I did not save the grain for honor. I did it because it was right. And my love for Rainier is not Shamit, is truth. If truth dishonors you, then perhaps your pride is built on lies." The words struck like a blade. Rauf Khan's face flushed red, his fists tightening. But before he could unleash his fury, a sudden cry echoed through the village square. A child had collapsed near the mosque, his mother screaming for help. Villagers rushed to gather around, panic in their eyes. The boy's breathing was shallow, his face pale as death. Without hesitation, Ayaan pushed through the crowd, lifting the boy in his arms. "Call the Hakim," he shouted. But the village healer was far, and time was short. Rainier appeared in the crowd, her hands steady as she guided them. "Take him to the well," she commanded. "He needs water, his body is burning with fever." The villagers, caught between fear and awe, obeyed. Ayaan lowered the boy carefully, while Rainier cooled his forehead with wet cloth. Together, without thinking of anything else, not pride, not defiance, not eyes watching, they worked side by side, and as the boy's breathing steadied, the crowd looked on in silence. Two hearts once divided by hate, now united not by fire, but by compassion. It was no longer a secret love, it was a love the whole village had seen with their own eyes. The boy survived. By dawn, word spread across the valley, how Rania and Ayaan had worked together to save him when even the elders faltered. Whispers of their courage carried like the wind, no longer hidden, no longer confined to shadows, but with admiration came unrest. For every villager who praised them, another muttered that this bond between the two was dangerous, an omen of rebellion against old laws, and no one felt the sting of those whispers more than Hakim Sahib and Rof Khan. That evening, the village council gathered in the mosque courtyard. Lanterns flickered against weathered faces as the elders debated fiercely. "They defy us openly," one man declared. "First the fire, now this. What will happen tomorrow? If we allow this union, we open the door to chaos." Another, older voice shook with weariness. "And if we forbid it, they are no longer children. Their courage is plain for all to see. Perhaps it is not chaos, but change, that we fear." The argument stretched deep into the night, voices rising, hands trembling, pride and fear clashing like swords. Meanwhile, Ayaan and Rania waited in silence, sitting apart yet bound by invisible threads of hope and dread. At last, Hakim Sahib stood, his figure tall, his presence commanding. His voice was steady, but behind it lay a storm. "My daughter has dishonored me with her stubbornness," he said, "and yet, twice now, she has stood with Ayaan to protect this village when others faltered. What should I call that, defiance or duty?" The crowd murmured. Rof Khan rose at once, his eyes burning. "Do not twist words, Hakim. This is not about duty. This is about your daughter and my son dragging our names through the mud. You know as well as I, our bloodlines cannot mix." Silence. The weight of tradition pressed heavily, yet the air crackled with something else, something shifting, fragile yet undeniable. Rainier rose to her feet, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. "If love is a sin, then let me be guilty. If unity is shame, then let shame be my crown. But do not ask us to unlearn what we have lived, what the whole village has seen with their own eyes, that in fire, in sickness, in fear, we chose each other, not once, but every time." Her words hung in the air, soft yet piercing. Even the night seemed to pause. Ayaan stood beside her then, his hand brushing against hers, not boldly, not rebelliously, but as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He looked at the elders, his voice firm. "We are not asking for your blessing to break the village. We are asking for your blessing to heal it. If hatred can divide us for generations, why cannot love unite us once?" The courtyard was still. The lantern flames flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance. With unease, no answer came that night. The council dispersed, each man carrying the weight of what he had heard. But as Ayaan and Rainier walked back through the silent village, something had changed. For the first time, their love was no longer a secret whispered behind doors. It was spoken aloud, carried in the open air. Impossible to deny. And though the path ahead was uncertain, they knew this truth. The battle had begun not between them and their families, but between love and the weight of centuries. The days after the council meeting felt heavier than any storm. The village carried an uneasy silence, as though everyone held their breath, waiting to see which way the tide would turn. Some elders walked past Ayaan and Rainier without a word, their faces stiff with disapproval. Yet others, especially the younger, men and women, let their eyes linger a little longer, carrying a flicker of quiet support. Change, it seemed, had entered the valley, but whether it would bring peace or ruin, no one could tell. For Ayaan and Rania, the days blurred together. They worked as they always had, he in the fields, she helping her mother with household chores, but beneath the surface, they carried the weight of uncertainty. They knew the council would not remain silent forever. A decision would come, and it would either bless their love or tear them apart. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in strokes of amber and crimson, Ayaan found Rania by the old mango tree at the edge of the fields. It was their quiet place, the one corner of the village where time seemed to pause, where words felt safe. "Do you think they'll allow it?" Ayaan asked softly, his eyes on the fading light. Rania didn't answer immediately. She plucked a leaf from the branch above her, turning it between her fingers as though searching for truth in its veins. Finally, she whispered, "Even if they don't, will you still stand with me?" Ayaan turned, his gaze steady, his voice unshaken. "Rania, even if the whole world turns against us, I will not let go of your hand." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of the fragile kind of hope that blooms even in the darkest soil. But fate, relentless as always, was preparing its own test. That same night, as the moon climbed high, messengers arrived from the neighboring village. They brought urgent news. Bandits had been sighted along the trade routes, and there were whispers they might descend upon the valley. The threat was real, and it demanded unity. The elders called an emergency meeting at dawn. This time, it was not about love, nor tradition, but survival. If the bandits came, the village would need every able hand, young and old, rival families alike. Hakim Sahib and Raf Khan, long-standing enemies, found themselves standing side by side in the council courtyard. Their faces were grave, their pride momentarily silenced by the shadow of danger. Ayaan volunteered at once, his voice firm. "If they come, I will defend our people." To everyone's surprise, Rania stepped forward to, "And so will I. This is my home as much as it is yours. I will not hide when my people are in danger." The courtyard erupted with protests. Women did not fight. Daughters of respected families did not stand in the line of fire. But Rania's eyes burned with quiet determination, and Ayaan's presence beside her only strengthened her resolve. In that moment, something began to shift. The village saw not just a boy and a girl tangled in forbidden love, but two souls willing to sacrifice for everyone, even those who condemned them. And deep in the shadows, the bandits were already moving closer. The warning of bandits spread through the valley like wildfire. Children were kept indoors, doors were fastened with wooden bars, and men sharpened their tools into weapons. Fear clung to the air, heavier than the monsoon clouds that loomed over the horizon. In the midst of this tension, Ayaan and Rania stood shoulder to shoulder, their decision unwavering. For the first time, people began to look at them differently, not as two reckless hearts defying tradition, but as pillars of strength willing to defend the land they all shared. Hakim Sahib, though still reluctant, could not hide the flicker of pride in his eyes when he saw his daughter step forward with courage. Raf Khan, hardened by years of enmity, studied Ayaan carefully, as though seeing not just the boy who had challenged him, but the man who stood ready to risk his life for the village. Preparations filled every waking hour. Watchtowers were repaired, bonfires prepared to signal danger, and patrols organized along the dusty paths that wound through the fields. Ayaan trained alongside the other young men, his body hardened by years of labor now fueled by a deeper purpose. Rania, though barred from carrying a sword, found her own way to contribute. She gathered herbs, prepared remedies, and tended to the children so their mothers could work without fear. Yet in quiet moments, she stole away to the mango tree where she and Ayaan would meet, their stolen minutes a reminder of why they fought. There, beneath its branches, their conversations grew heavier, more urgent. "What if something happens to you?" she whispered one evening, clutching his hand as though the mere thought of letting go would undo her. Ayaan's eyes softened. "Then, promise me you'll live enough for both of us. Promise me you'll carry my love with you, even if I cannot." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head fiercely. "No, Ayaan, don't speak of endings. We are not meant to be torn apart, not now, not ever." Their words were carried away by the night breeze, but fate listened. Days later, as dawn broke over the valley, the first signs of the bandits appeared. Smoke rose on the horizon, black and thick, curling against the pale morning sky. A rider came rushing into the village, his horse lathered in sweat. "They're near," he cried, his voice breaking. "They've raided the next settlement there. Coming this way." Panic surged through the villagers. Mothers clutched their children. Men grabbed whatever weapons they could find. The council gathered hastily, voices raised in heated arguments. Should they flee to the mountains, or stand their ground? It was Ayaan who stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we run, they will burn our homes and leave us with nothing. If we fight, we protect not just our land, but our honor." A silence fell. His words carried a weight far beyond his years, and even Raf Khan found himself nodding reluctantly. And then, something unexpected happened. Rania walked into the circle, her chin high, her eyes blazing. "If you fight, then so will I, perhaps not with a blade, but with courage. You will need hands to heal the wounded, hearts to steady the frightened. Do not think courage belongs only to the men of this village." The council, shocked into silence, could not argue. They had no choice but to let her stand alongside them. That night, torches flickered along the borders of the village. Ayaan gripped his spear tightly, his heart pounding like a drum. Rainier stood not far behind, carrying bundles of herbs and cloth, her resolve unshaken. The villagers braced themselves, united not by choice but by necessity, and in that fragile unity, something remarkable began to grow. The old rivalries between Hakim Sahib and Rof Khan seemed to blur, replaced by the shared responsibility of survival. Enemies found themselves standing side by side, and for the first time in generations, the valley felt like one. The bandits were coming. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, and Ayaan and Rainier, their fates intertwined, knew that what happened next would change everything, not just for them, but for the village that had long resisted change. The night descended, heavy and restless, the silence broken only by the crackle of torches and the whisper of blades being drawn. A chill crept over the valley, as though the earth itself knew what was coming. From the distant ridge, shadows began to move, dozens of figures mounted on horses, their torches flaring like the eyes of demons in the dark. The bandits had arrived. Their shouts echoed through the valley, wild and merciless, striking fear into every heart that listened. The villagers braced themselves. Ayaan stood at the front, his spear in hand, his breath steady despite the storm raging inside him. Behind him, Rof Khan and the other men readied their bows, while Hakim Sahib held a torch high to signal their preparedness. Rainier stood among the women and elders, her bundle of herbs clutched close to her chest. Her lips moved in silent prayer, not for herself, but for Ayaan, for her father, for every soul that stood between their home and destruction. The first clash came suddenly. The bandits charged, their horses thundering against the earth like a rolling storm. Arrows flew, torches were hurled, and within moments the air was thick with smoke and cries of battle. Ayaan fought fiercely, his body moving with a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Every strike of his spear was driven by more than was fueled by love, by a promise to Rainier, by the dream of a future that must not be stolen. Rof Khan, though older, fought with equal ferocity, his booming voice rallying the men. For the first time, Ayaan felt no animosity toward him, only respect, as though the battle itself had burned away years of enmity. But the fight was brutal. The bandits were many, their swords glinting in the torchlight as they pressed harder and harder. Villagers fell, wounded or worse, and Rainier rushed among them, binding wounds, pressing herbs against bleeding gashes, whispering words of strength to those on the brink of despair. And then it happened. Ayaan, locked in combat with a towering bandit chief, was knocked to the ground. The man raised his blade high, ready to deliver the fatal blow. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to that single moment. "Ayaan!" Rainier screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. With every ounce of strength, Ayaan rolled aside, grabbing a fallen shield and deflecting the strike. The blade clanged against iron, sparks flying. He rose with a roar, driving his spear forward and striking the man down. The ground trembled as the bandit chief fell, and with him, the spirit of his men seemed to waver. The villagers seized the moment. With renewed courage, they pushed back, shouting as one. Flames from the burning torches lit up the night, casting the scene in a wild, fiery glow. The bandits, realizing their leader was lost, began to scatter, their once fearsome charge dissolving into chaos. When the dust settled, silence returned to the valley, broken only by the sobs of relief, the groans of the wounded, and the crackling of dying flames. Ayaan, bloodied and bruised, stood among the survivors, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Rainier rushed to him, tears streaming, and for the first time, she embraced him openly before everyone. "You lived," she whispered into his chest, her voice trembling. "I told you," Ayaan said, his arms wrapping around her. "Not even death could keep me from you." The villagers, once divided, watched the two of them, and something shifted. No one spoke of boundaries, of family names, or of forbidden love. In that moment, all they saw was truth. Two hearts that had fought as one. Two souls whose bond had saved them all. Hakim Sahib, weary and scarred, laid a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his gaze lingering on Ayaan. For the first time, there was no anger, there only acceptance, however reluctant. Rofcon, too, gave a small nod, as though conceding silently what words could not yet say. The battle had ended, but its echoes would ripple far beyond that night, setting in motion a change that could never be undone. And beneath the same mango tree where their story had begun, Ayaan and Rainier would soon learn that love, once kindled by fire and trial, could no longer be denied. The dawn that followed was unlike any other. The first rays of sunlight crept timidly over the horizon, touching the scorched earth where the battle had been fought only hours before. The fields that had once echoed with the cries of war now lay quiet, bathed in a golden glow, as though nature itself sought to heal what had been broken. The villagers gathered slowly, their faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and relief all at once. Some carried the wounded on makeshift stretchers, while others knelt to bury the fallen. Smoke still rose in thin trails from burnt thatch and broken carts, the smell of ash lingering in the air. Yet, amidst the ruins, there was life. Children peeked out from behind their mothers, clutching at their skirts, their wide eyes filled with questions. Old men sat on stones, recounting the night's battle in hushed voices, their words carrying both pride and sorrow. Ayaan stood at the edge of the fields, his hands bruised, his clothes torn, but his spirit unbroken. He looked out over the village he had fought for, a place that had once rejected him, and now perhaps would see him in a different light. Behind him, he heard the soft footsteps he knew too well. Rania approached, her shawl wrapped loosely around her, her eyes weary but bright. She carried a basket filled with herbs, bandages, and clay jars of ointments, ready to tend once more to the wounded. "You should rest," she told him softly, her voice carrying both worry and tenderness. I turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I could say the same to you." She looked at him, her gaze lingering on the cuts across his cheek, the blood on his arm. Without a word, she set down her basket and began cleaning his wounds, her hands trembling slightly. "You could have died," she whispered, her breath uneven. "If you had fallen, but I didn't," Ayaan interrupted gently, his fingers brushing against hers. "I told you, Rainier, I would fight the whole world if it meant keeping you safe." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, she leaned closer, as though the rest of the world had faded away. But their moment was interrupted by a voice Ayaan Rofcon called, his tone stern but not hostile. The older man approached slowly, his arm bandaged from a cut he had taken in the fight. His usual pride was tempered now, his eyes carrying a heaviness Ayaan had not seen before. The young man straightened, expecting scorn, but instead, Rofcon gave a small nod. "You fought well," he said, his voice gruff. "Without you, perhaps none of us would have lived to see this morning." Ayaan was silent, unsure how to respond. Rofcon had never offered him anything but disdain. This acknowledgement, however brief, felt heavier than any praise. Rof's gaze shifted to his daughter, still tending Ayaan's wounds with quiet devotion. He said nothing more, but his silence was louder than words. Something had changed in him. Perhaps not acceptance, not yet, but the first step toward it. Later that morning, Hakim Sahib gathered the men beneath the old banyan tree. His face was grave, his clothes torn, but his voice carried strength. "We stood together last night," he said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, "and together we survived. This land, this village, it is ours because we defended it, side by side, without thinking of old quarrels or grudges." The men murmured in agreement, heads nodded. For the first time, boundaries seemed less important than unity, and though no one said it aloud, many glanced toward Ayaan, who had once been an outsider, a troublemaker, but who had now stood at the front line when their lives depended on it. In the days that followed, the village slowly came back to life. Fields were cleared, walls rebuilt, and laughter, hesitant at first, began to return. Children played in the dust once more, their games no longer shadowed by fear. Women sang softly as they worked, their voices carrying a fragile hope. For Ayaan and Rania, the days were filled with moments stolen in between the busyness, smiles exchanged across the fields, whispered words beneath the mango tree, touches that spoke of promises yet unspoken. The village was healing, but so too were hearts. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was becoming clearer with every sunrise. Love, once kindled, could not be extinguished, not by hatred, not by battle, not even by time itself. Days turned into a week. The village, though scarred, began to wear the look of life once more. Broken fences were mended, cattle were returned to their sheds, and the once blackened fields began to show the first hints of green. But within homes, a different kind of rebuilding was taking place, of trust, of relationships, of understanding. For Rania, every day was a tug between duty and heart. She helped her mother cook for the laborers, carried water to the fields, and stitched torn clothes for those who had none left. But in every quiet moment, her eyes searched for Ayaan, and more often than not, she found him helping rebuild walls, leading the younger boys in repairing the grain store, or simply standing by the well, his laughter carrying across the courtyard. It was no longer a secret. The villagers noticed, children whispered, women smiled knowingly, and old men shook their heads with a mix of disapproval and amusement. The once hidden glances between the two had grown into something undeniable, but not everyone welcomed it. One evening, as the call of the muezzin drifted over the rooftops and the last streaks of sunlight painted the sky, Rofkhan sat with Hakim Sahib in the courtyard of the elder's home. The men drank tea in silence for a long time before Rof finally spoke. "She is my only daughter," he said, his voice heavy. "I raised her to be strong, to uphold our honor. How can I give her hand to the boy who, for years, was the very thorn in my side?" Hakim Sahib stirred his cup slowly. "Times change, Rof. We all saw what Ayaan did. He stood when others faltered. Even you, in your heart, cannot deny it." Rof's jaw tightened. "I do not deny his courage, but courage is not the only measure of a man. He is hot-tempered, stubborn, quick to fight." Hakim Sahib smiled faintly. "And tell me, were you any different at his age?" Rof's lips pressed together. He did not answer at that moment. Footsteps approached. Rania entered, carrying a tray of bread and lentils. She greeted them quietly and placed the food on the low table. But before she could turn away, Rof stopped her. "Rania," he said, firmly, "sit." She obeyed, her eyes lowering. Her father studied her face, the same face that had once smiled at him as a child, now glowing with the quiet fire of a young woman's heart. "Do you care for him?" he asked, though the answer was already written in her eyes. Her fingers twisted the edge of her dupatta. She hesitated, but then lifted her gaze, meeting his with trembling courage. "Yes, Abba, I do." Silence fell over the courtyard. Hakim Sahib glanced between father and daughter, but said nothing, letting the moment breathe. Rof's chest rose and fell. For years, he had seen Ayaan as the boy who disrespected him, who challenged him, who reminded him of every weakness in his authority. And now, that same boy had become the center of his daughter's world. Anger flickered within him, but so too did a strange, reluctant pride, for had not that boy also saved them all? "You are young," he said finally, his tone softer but still stern. "Love is a flame that burns bright, but can fade quickly. Marriage is not only about love, it is about patience, duty, sacrifice. Do you understand this?" Rania nodded, her eyes glistening. "I do, Abba, and I am ready." Rof closed his eyes for a moment, as though weighing the weight of generations on his shoulders. When he opened them again, his voice carried resignation, more than resistance. "Then let us see if he is ready too." The words carried through the village faster than fire through dry grass. That night, as stars scattered across the velvet sky, word spread. Rofkhan was considering Ayaan for his daughter's hand. Some rejoiced, some doubted, but all agreed on one thing: this was not just about a boy and a girl. It was about the old grudges of the past, about whether love could truly change the shape of an entire village. And for Ayaan, the greatest test was yet to come. The next morning dawned clear, the sky painted in soft strokes of orange and gold. A hush of anticipation lingered in the village air, as though everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Rofkhan had sent word. The elders were to gather in the Hudra, the village's communal meeting place. There Ayaan would be called to stand before them. When the time came, men filled the room, sitting cross-legged on woven mats. Their faces bore the weathered lines of age, wisdom, and long memories of feuds and reconciliations. At the head sat HakimSahib.com, as always, his fingers moving slowly over his prayer beads. Beside him sat Rofkhan, stern and silent, his expression unreadable. Then Ayaan entered. He bowed respectfully and took his place in the center. His heart beat heavily in his chest, but his face remained steady. He had faced storms, floods, and danger, but this moment, standing before the eyes of his elders, felt heavier than all of it. Rof Khan spoke first. His voice carried authority that filled the room. "Ayaan," he said, "for years you and I have stood on opposite sides. You are brave, no doubt, but also reckless. You have spirit, but sometimes without discipline. And yet, you saved this village when it was drowning. You worked day and night when others rested. For this, no one can deny your worth." The room hummed with agreement. Ayaan kept his gaze fixed, his jaw tight, waiting for the rest. But now, Rof continued, "The matter is not about bravery alone. It is about responsibility. It is about whether you can lead, protect, and provide, not just for yourself, but for another family, for a wife, for children who will one day bear your name." He leaned forward. "So tell us, Ayaan, what do you seek in my daughter? What is it that binds your heart to hers?" The room fell silent, every ear strained to catch his answer. Ayaan swallowed, then spoke, his voice firm yet tender. "Rof Khan, Hakim Sahib, respected elders, I will not deny my past. Yes, I was stubborn. Yes, I was quick to fight. But the floods taught me something. I had not known before that life is fragile, that pride means little when water rises to your chest, that grudges are dust in the wind. In those days, I saw what truly mattered. I saw Ronia's courage, her kindness, her strength. She worked beside us, carried burdens as heavy as any man, and still found time to comfort the children. It was then I knew I could spend a lifetime learning from her." He paused, his voice lowering, but growing steadier. "I do not seek her for beauty alone, though she has it. I do not seek her for wealth, for she carries none. I seek her because with her, I am better. With her, I am not just Ayaan the reckless boy. I am Ayaan, the man who can build, protect, and love." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the most skeptical of elders found themselves nodding. Hakim Sahib leaned back, his eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. But Rof Khan remained silent, testing him with a gaze sharp as steel. After a long moment, Rof finally rose to his feet. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the floor. He looked at Ayaan, then at the gathered men, then back again. "Your words are strong," he said, "but words must stand upon deeds. For this union to be accepted, you must prove not only to me, but to all that you can lead with wisdom, as well as courage." Ayaan met his eyes. "What must I do?" Rof turned to the villagers. "Tomorrow," he declared, "we will begin rebuilding the great bridge by the river, the one swept away in the floods. It connects our fields to the marketplace, and without it, our trade suffers. Ayaan will lead this task. If he succeeds, not only will the village stand stronger, but I will know he can shoulder the weight of responsibility. If he fails," his voice trailed off, heavy with meaning. The men exchanged glances, whispers buzzing through the room like restless bees. Ayaan bowed his head. "Then tomorrow, I will begin, and I will not fail." That night, as he walked out of the hujra, the cool breeze brushing against his face, Rania stood waiting at the edge of the courtyard. Her eyes searched his with worry, but also with trust. "What did they say?" she whispered. Ayaan took her hand gently, his voice low but steady. "They asked me to build a bridge." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You've already built one, Ayaan, between your heart and mine." And under the moonlit sky, the two stood side by side, knowing that the bridge of wood and stone was not the only one that would decide their future. The bridge of love and trust would matter just as much. The morning of the bridge building dawned, bright and clear, yet the air was thick with expectation. Villagers gathered along the riverbank, some carrying tools, others bringing bundles of wood and rope. The sound of rushing water filled the air, a constant reminder of the floods that had nearly destroyed them weeks ago. At the center of it all stood Ayaan. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands calloused from long days of work. Yet today felt different. He wasn't just another laborer, he was the leader. Every eye was on him, waiting to see if he could truly rise to the challenge set before him by Rof Khan and the elders. Rania stood a little apart, her dupatta fluttering in the morning breeze. Though she didn't speak, her gaze followed Ayaan with quiet strength, as if willing him to succeed. Hakim Sahib raised his hand for silence. His calm voice carried across the gathered crowd. "Today, we rebuild not just a bridge of wood and rope," he said, "but a bridge of trust, of unity, of hope. Ayaan will lead this task, But remember, no bridge is built by one man alone. It takes many hands, many hearts. The men and women nodded in agreement. Some still looked doubtful, but most were eager. The floods had taught them that survival depended on working together. Ayaan stepped forward. His voice, usually fiery, was steady and measured. "Brothers, sisters," he began, "this bridge is more than planks of wood. It is the lifeline of our village. Without it, our crops cannot reach the market. Without it, our children cannot safely cross to school. We will not wait for outsiders to save us. We will save ourselves." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I promise you, I will work until the last nail is driven, the last rope tightened, but I cannot do it alone. Will you stand with me?" A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Men hefted axes, women brought baskets of stones for the foundation, and even children carried smaller bundles of sticks, eager to help. The work began. Ayaan directed the tasks with surprising calm. Where once he might have barked orders impatiently, now he explained carefully, making sure everyone understood. He divided groups. Some cut wood, others carried stones, while skilled carpenters measured and prepared beams. The villagers watched him closely, murmuring to one another. "He has changed," an elder remarked quietly. "There is wisdom in his tone now." By midday, sweat poured down faces, shirts clung to backs, and the sounds of saws and hammers echoed across the riverbank. Still, the bridge slowly took shape, its wooden foundation driven deep into the earth. Ropes tied tight, beams laid one after another. At one point, a heavy log slipped from its support, threatening to crush a young boy who had wandered too close. Ayaan reacted instantly, throwing his weight against the log and shoving it aside. The boy scrambled to safety, trembling. Ayaan crouched down, gripping the boy's shoulders gently. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, wide-eyed. "Then remember this," Ayaan said firmly but kindly. "Bravery is not just lifting heavy loads, it is knowing when to stay safe. Next time, stand back until the work is done." The villagers watched the exchange in silence, and in that moment, they saw not the hot-headed youth of old, but a man learning patience, care, and responsibility. By evening, half the bridge stood proudly over the water. The villagers cheered, their spirits high despite aching muscles. Rof Khan stood at a distance, arms folded, his face still unreadable. Yet when his eyes met Hakim Sahib's, the old healer gave him a knowing smile. Rof Khan said nothing, but his gaze lingered on Ayaan longer than usual. As the sun dipped low, painting the river in shades of crimson and gold, Ayaan wiped the sweat from his brow and looked toward Rania. She was standing on the riverbank, her eyes glowing with pride. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, she gave a small nod, silent encouragement, silent love. The bridge was not yet complete. The hardest part lay ahead, but Ayaan knew, deep in his bones, that he would see it through, not just for the village, not just for Rofkon's approval, but for her. The next morning, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, heavy with rain. The villagers exchanged worried glances as they arrived at the construction site. The half-built bridge stretched bravely across the river, but it looked fragile under the threatening sky. "Perhaps we should wait for clear weather," one man muttered, but Ayaan shook his head. "If we wait, the river will only grow stronger. We must act before it swells again. Every day counts." Some grumbled in protest, but most followed his lead. Work resumed. Ropes were tightened, beams adjusted, nails hammered in. The wind picked up, whistling through the valley, tugging at their clothes and hair. By midday, the storm broke. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground to mud. The river below roared louder, as if mocking their efforts. Ayaan stood on the half-finished bridge, soaked to the skin, shouting instructions over the thunder. "Hold the ropes tighter. Tie them again if you must. Do not let the beams slip." Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a boom that shook the villagers to their core. A few men backed away, fear in their eyes. "This is madness," one cried. "We'll be swept away." The panic spread quickly. Several dropped their tools, retreating toward the riverbank. Ayaan felt his chest tighten. If they abandoned the work now, all their efforts would be wasted. But he also knew fear. He could see it in their faces, because he felt it in his own bones. And then, through the rain and chaos, he saw Rania. She stood beneath an old tree, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, her face pale but her eyes steady. She didn't move forward, didn't shout, but simply looked at him. And in that look, Ayaan felt something stir a strength beyond his own. He raised his voice again, this time not with orders, but with conviction. Listen to me. We've suffered storms before. Our crops drowned, our homes washed away. And yet, we are still here. If we turn back now, the river wins. Do you want your children to face the same fate again? Do you want to live in fear forever? His words cut through the rain like fire. The villagers hesitated. Then one man stepped forward. I will stay. Another followed. Then another. Slowly, those who had retreated returned, gripping their tools with renewed determination. Together, they braced against the storm. Ropes were pulled tighter, beams secured, stakes driven deeper into the mud. Women held lanterns against the darkening sky, their flames flickering but unyielding. Even the children ran with buckets, carrying stones to weigh down the supports. Hours passed. The rain did not relent, but neither did the people. And when at last the storm began to weaken, the bridge still stood stronger than before. Exhausted, the villagers collapsed along the riverbank, breathing heavily. Some laughed with relief, others wept openly. Ayaan remained standing on the bridge, his body trembling with fatigue, but his heart soaring. He turned toward the crowd, his voice hoarse but proud. You see, he shouted, the storm could not break us, because together we are stronger than the river. The villagers erupted into cheers. This time, there was no doubt in their voices. They believed. Hakim Sahib, watching from the edge, whispered to himself, the boy is no longer a boy. Even Rauf Khan, who had observed silently through the storm, allowed himself the smallest of smiles quickly hidden beneath his beard as the people celebrated. Ayaan caught Rania's gaze once more. She smiled softly, shy yet radiant, like sunlight, breaking through clouds. And for Ayaan, no thunder, no river, no storm could ever shake him more than that smile. The days that followed the storm were filled with a strange calm. The sky cleared, leaving the valley washed in crisp light, as though the heavens themselves were watching the villagers' determination with approval. From sunrise to sunset, the people worked without pause. Now, they no longer dragged their feet or questioned Ayaan's decisions. Instead, they carried themselves with pride, speaking of the bridge as if it were already a living thing, a guardian that would stand between them and the fury of the river. Each log that was placed, each rope tied, felt like a prayer answered. Even the elders, who once shook their heads at Ayaan's youthful boldness, now praised his leadership. By the end of the week, the final beams were lifted into place. Sweat ran down faces, muscles burned, and hands blistered, but not a single person complained. They all knew what this moment meant. At last, the bridge stretched fully across the river, sturdy and unyielding. The villagers gathered along the banks, staring at it in silence. For a heartbeat, it was as though time itself paused. Then Hakim Sahib stepped forward, his cane tapping the ground. He raised his hand and spoke, his voice trembling yet strong. This bridge is not just wood and rope. It is the blood of our struggle, the proof of our unity. It belongs to every soul here, and to every child who will one day cross it. Tears glistened in many eyes. Someone began to clap. Soon the whole crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing across the valley. Ayaan stood at the center, humbled, his chest tight with emotion. He had dreamed of this moment, but reality was far greater. He wasn't just the boy who challenged the river, he had become the man who led his people through it. And in the crowd, he found Rania. She stood quietly, a smile softening her lips, her eyes shining with something she had never allowed him to see before. She held her shawl close, but in that instant, she looked at him as though the walls between them had finally begun to fall. Later that evening, the villagers lit lanterns along the bridge. The golden lights reflected in the water, turning the river into a glowing ribbon beneath the stars. Families laughed, children skipped across the wooden planks, testing the strength of what they had built together. Ayaan walked slowly, his hand brushing against the ropes, as though to remind himself it was real. He paused midway, listening to the creak of wood and the rush of water below. Footsteps approached. He turned and found Rania beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting warm glimmers on her face. You did it, she said softly, her voice carrying a rare gentleness. No, Ayaan corrected, shaking his head. We did it. Rania lowered her gaze, as though hiding a smile. And yet, when she looked back at him, there was no denying the spark that had ignited between them. The bridge had been built, not only across the river, but between two hearts that had once known only distance. That night, the village slept in peace. For the first time in years, they no longer feared the river. And for Ayaan, lying awake under the stars, he knew that the story of his life had only just begun. The bridge became more than wood, rope, and stone. It became the lifeline of the village. Farmers carried their produce safely across. Children ran to school without fear of the river's wrath. And elders crossed with steady steps, whispering prayers of gratitude. With every passing day, the people spoke of it not as Ayaan's bridge, but as our bridge. Yet in their whispers, there was another story quietly unfolding, one that belonged to Ayaan and Rainier. At first, it was subtle. Rainier would be seen standing by the riverbank, waiting for Ayaan to finish inspecting the bridge. Sometimes she brought him a flask of cool water or a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. The villagers noticed, but said nothing. They only smiled knowingly. Ayaan, for his part, no longer hid the warmth in his eyes when he spoke to her. Gone was the sharpness, the teasing, the old rivalry. In its place bloomed a gentleness, a respect, and something deeper that grew stronger each day. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the sky in orange and gold, Ayaan found himself walking beside Rainier along the bridge. The wood beneath, their feet groaned softly, the river hummed below, and for once, there was no need for words. Finally, Rainier broke the silence. "Do you remember?" she said, her voice light but touched with memory. "How we used to argue about who could run faster through the fields?" Ayaan chuckled. "I remember you cheating." Her eyes widened in mock offense. "Cheating? I was always faster. You just couldn't admit it." He laughed, the sound ringing clear against the wind. For a moment, it felt as though time had folded back, carrying them both to the innocence of childhood. Yet, beneath the laughter, there was something new and awareness of how far they had come, and how much they had changed. Rainier stopped at the middle of the bridge. She leaned against the rope railing, staring at the horizon where the fields met the sky. Her voice lowered. "We used to fight because we didn't understand each other. I think I didn't want to understand you." Eon's smile faded into something softer, more serious. He stepped closer, though still careful, as though afraid a single wrong move would break the fragile moment. "And now?" he asked quietly. Rainier turned, meeting his gaze. In her eyes was honesty, unshielded and raw. "Now, I don't want to fight anymore." The words hung between them, carried by the wind. Ayaan's heart thudded in his chest. For all the storms he had faced, for all the battles he had fought with nature, nothing had left him so unguarded as this moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught. Instead, he simply nodded. They stood there together, side by side. As the lanterns along the bridge flickered to life, from the bank, a group of children giggled, watching them. One of them whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "They're going to get married one day." The laughter spread, and though Rainier blushed deeply, she didn't turn away. Instead, she let the warmth of Ayaan's presence steady her. That night, the whispers of the village grew. People spoke of crops, of markets, of weather, but beneath it all was the knowing smile, the gentle prediction that soon there would be a wedding in the valley. For the first time, Ayaan and Rainier were no longer two separate stories. Their paths had begun to merge into one. The days passed gently, like pages turning in a well-worn book. What once had been rivalry now blossomed into companionship, and what had begun as subtle glances now grew into moments filled with unspoken meaning. Ayaan found himself seeking Rainier's company in the simplest of things. If he went to the market, to buy tools, she was often there with her mother, choosing grains or cloth. If he passed by the orchards, he would see her gathering fruit with the other women, and slowly, instead of walking away as he once might have, he began to linger, to help, to stay just a little longer. Rainier, too, noticed the change within herself. Where once she bristled at his presence, she now looked forward to it. She began to anticipate his laughter, to recognize the steadiness in his words, to rely on his quiet strength. One afternoon, a festival was held in the village square. The lanterns were strung high above, their glow painting the evening in hues of amber. Music rose from the dole, the flute, and the clap of hands. Families gathered, children danced, and food stalls brimmed with color and spice. It was here that the bond between Ayaan and Rainier became impossible to ignore. As the music swelled, groups formed circles to dance. Rainier stood with her friends, laughing when she felt a hand extend toward her. She turned to see Ayaan, his expression playful yet shy, his hand steady in its offer. For a moment, her breath caught. Then, with a smile both nervous and bold, she placed her hand in his dot. The crowd cheered, the circle widened, and together they moved in rhythm with the music. Their steps tentative at first, then free, then effortless. The night air filled with laughter and song, and though they danced among many, it seemed to them as if the world had narrowed to just two. Their parents watched from the sidelines. Ayaan's father, a man of few words, exchanged a glance with Ronia's mother. A smile tugged at his lips. Later that night, when the festival had ended and the lanterns were dimming, Ayaan's mother spoke softly to him as they walked home. "No," she said, her voice carrying both affection and teasing. "A boy who dances with a girl beneath the lanterns must one day answer to the elders about his intentions." Ayaan froze, embarrassed. "Mother," but she only laughed, patting his arm. "Don't worry, I think the village already knows." Meanwhile, in Ronia's home, her grandmother said almost the same words, sitting by the hearth, her wrinkled hands busy with wool. She looked at Rania and asked, "Child, when did your enemy become your companion?" Rania blushed deeply, unable to meet her grandmother's knowing eyes. The old woman only smiled. "Love comes like the river, sometimes in floods, sometimes in trickles. But when it comes, there is no stopping it." And so, while neither I nor Rania spoke aloud of marriage, the village began preparing itself quietly. The elders discussed alliances, the women dreamed of ceremonies, and the children whispered about the wedding sweets they would taste. For the first time, the idea of their union was not a question, it was an inevitability. The morning of the wedding dawned unlike any other. The village, usually quiet at sunrise, was alive with color and sound. Women decorated the lanes with garlands of marigold and jasmine, while men set up canopies draped in red and gold. The fragrance of fresh bread and sweetmeats filled the air. In the heart of the square, where once Ayaan and Rania had quarreled as children, a grand stage had been built. Today, it was not a battlefield of words, but the place where their love would be bound forever. Rania sat inside her home, surrounded by women, her mother, aunts, cousins, all busy adorning her with henna and jewelry. The intricate patterns on her hands seemed to tell the story of her life, the thorns of old, grudges woven into the flowers of newfound love. Her grandmother adjusted the veil on her head and whispered, "You look like a queen, child. Remember, love is not found, it is built stone by stone, moment by moment. You and Ayaan have already begun." Rania smiled, her heart racing with both nerves and joy. Meanwhile, across the village, Ayaan prepared with his friends. He wore a shawani of cream and gold, his usual simplicity now dressed in grandeur. His father clasped his shoulder and said quietly, "You have turned from a boy into a man, not by strength, but by patience. Today, that patience becomes a home." When the procession began, the village gathered in excitement. Drums beat loudly, flutes sang, and children ran alongside the groom's party. Ayaan walked with steady steps, though his heart thudded wildly within him. And then came the moment. Rania was led to the stage, her veil shimmering beneath the sunlight. As she walked, her eyes lifted, and across the distance, they found Ayaan's. It was the same look they had shared in quarrels, in stolen glances, in dances beneath lanterns, but today it carried only certainty. The ceremony began. Prayers were recited, blessings given. The elders placed their hands upon the young couple, speaking words of guidance and hope. Finally, when the vows were exchanged, the crowd erupted in cheer for Ayaan and Rania. It was as though time slowed. He reached out, and she placed her hand in his, just as she had done that night at the festival. Only this time, it was not a dance, but a promise. The feast that followed stretched long into the night. Tables overflowed with food, laughter echoed through the square, and music carried into the sky. Children played, friends teased, and the entire village seemed wrapped in a single joy. Later, when the crowd had begun to quiet and the stars glimmered above, Ayaan and Rania slipped away for a moment of solitude. They stood by the riverbank, where the water reflected the moonlight like silver. "This feels unreal," Rania whispered. Ayaan smiled, tightening his grip on her hand. "It feels like the only thing that was ever meant to be." They fell into silence, watching the river flow. The same river that had witnessed their fights, their laughter, their growing love, now carried the beginning of their forever. And so, their story, which began with quarrels in a small village, ended with a union celebrated by all. But in truth, it was not an ending at all. It was the start of a new chapter, one of love built on history, one of patience, forgiveness, and companionship. The village would speak of them for years, the boy and girl who once could not stand each other, yet became inseparable, and every time children asked how such a story was possible, the elders would smile and say, because love is not always at first sight. Sometimes it begins with a spark of rivalry, grows with the warmth of friendship, and blossoms into forever.